Now. Welcome to this research and practice event held on the 4th of May 2022. I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining from the traditional lands of the Bunurong people. I extend respect to elders, past, present and emerging, as the traditional custodians of land, seas, skies, waterways and all systems that embody country. As designers, psychologists and researchers in the AEC industry, we note the direct role of the built environment in the lives of Indigenous peoples as custodians, knowledge holders, end users and community members of the places that we shape. I'm Jacqueline Baker, your host, and today's speaker is researcher Serene Ho, who is joining us from RMIT in Melbourne. Welcome, Serene. Serene, in a nutshell, is researching the process of giving land rights to slum dwellers, focusing on two projects, one in India and the other in the Solomon Islands. You may remember Carly Manani's presentation from September last year, which also focused on slum dwellers. Singapore-born, Serene is from the Perenaki ethnic group, and her parents are a mixture of Chinese, Malay and Portuguese. Serene's life in Australia began in 1998 when she moved to Melbourne to study. Her undergrad studies were awarded with a Bachelor of Arts with a double major in sociolinguistics and geography and an honours degree in geography. After graduating, Serene spent 10 years in higher education marketing for international students in at Melbourne University and achieving permanent residency in Australia at this time. In 2009, Serene pursued a master's degree in Geographic Information Technology at the University of Melbourne, and this was followed by a PhD in Engineering, also at the University of Melbourne. Soon after graduating with a doctorate, she was offered a 3-year postdoc at the Public Governance Institute at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium with the Horizon 2020 project, which I think Serene will share a little more about with us. After that, in 2019, Serene was awarded a Vice-Chancellor's Fellowship at RMIT, a position she remains in today. Serene's presentation focuses on the India-based Slum Upgrading Project, which is located in the state of Odisha on the Bay of Bengal. After the presentation, there'll be an opportunity to discuss for a discussion and questions. But in the meantime, over to you, Serene.
Thanks, Jacqueline. That is by far the most epic bio introduction I've ever had the privilege of being on the receiving end of. I feel like I should come with food or something when it sounds like that. So thanks everyone. And thanks again for coming, and I'll try to make your lunchtime hour entertaining. And shout out to Kali as well. I attended your presentation last year and that was awesome. Okay, so I never know which way this goes. So I'm going to try to share screen, but it's never really liked what I'm doing. I think I'm just going to have to share. Okay, all right. So, alrighty. Let's see if that works. Is that working for everyone? It's on screen, nothing weird, no emails are showing. Okay, great. Okay, so I'd like to first start by echoing the acknowledgement of country. I'm connecting with you today from the lands of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose lands I live and work as an uninvited guest. So the presentation today, I'm going to try to share with you what I've been doing in about half an hour and leaving kind of a lot of time for robust and vigorous discussion about all the things that pique your interest with this project. So But maybe before I start, I guess I might give an introduction to, spend a couple of minutes talking about why, the work I do is what, how it looks and functions in this big kind of global economy. So there's been a lot of focus on land tenure, land titling, and the, I guess, engineering discipline of land administration for quite a while now. It's kind of come from a very neoliberal idea of economic reform, where individual property rights are seen as kind of the basis for land markets, so state wealth generation, but also for those who hold extra legal rights, lots of the world's poor. The argument is that formalizing, giving them recognition of these individual land rights will help them lift themselves out of poverty. So this idea is largely attributed to a Peruvian economist, although it has a long-standing legacy in economic thought. But it's this center pillar that I focus your attention on. So it's this domain of documenting information and mapping land rights that really forms the core of land administration and land titling activities around the world. And since the 1990s, the World Bank, which is one of, I just use them as an example because they're one of the world's biggest financiers of these types of projects. They've invested about 2.7 billion, in these kinds of projects alone. And hang on, let me just try to move this because I can't see anyone. But since 2016, with land titling coming under the Sustainable Development Goals as a proxy measure, both for poverty and gender equality, there's really been a ramp up in investment in this kind of work. So 577 million represents about 20% of the bank's investments, and this is only since 2016. But increasingly, because the scale of the problem is huge, right? So experts estimate, and it might just be a heuristic, but the estimation is that about 60% of property rights around the world aren't actually documented in formal systems. So there's a real push to use technology to scale all these mapping and documentation efforts. Okay, so just some example of the kinds of projects that have been funded in the recent years. And you can see a lot of them is focused on this technical documentary kind of element in land reform projects. And there's much more data available. But what I guess I'm interested in as a researcher is, given the close kind of the fundamental role that technology is now playing in these land reforms, how can we understand the role of technology in building confidence in these land reforms? And that's what the Odisha project looks at. So just to give you a bit of background, so I think most people would comfortably know that informality in India is a significant policy and practice challenge. There are some stats on screen. I won't go into it too much, but one of the key stats here is that 50% of urban households are landless. Similarly, in Odisha, which has kind of the 11th highest population in India, about 42 million in the state, there's also a significant significant degree of informality. And 1 in 4 of Odisha's towns are slums, but 1 in 4 people who live in Odisha's towns live in slums. But actually, the sum total of area that slums occupy is only 2% of the total area of the state, or 4% of its habitable area. But it's kind of become an increasing policy issue because the urban population is growing, and housing isn't really keeping up. And Odisha is one of the states in India that's really been trying to tackle this from a tenure perspective for quite a number of decades now. So on the bottom, I've just given you some of the key policy initiatives that have been enacted in the state just to tackle kind of this issue of urban poverty and slums. So the latest in 2017 was the enactment of new legislation that gave limited land rights to slum dwellers. And so these land rights don't give them full rights over land. They can't transfer the land. They can only, but they can mortgage it, and they can give it to their kids through inheritance. So this project, so the project is encapsulated in this broader policy around creating livable habitats in slums. So in addition to land rights, which is seen as this foundational component, it's also accompanied by a range of upgrading activities, including sealing the roads, sanitation, all the typical WASH elements, but also kind of capacity building and social infrastructure. So the project in Odisha is notable, for its size, its scale, its speed, but also for its, it's also noted for its legal innovation. So the legislation is really novel. The use of technology to rapidly map these settlements, and kind of a distributed approach to delivering the project, which I'll kind of touch on very quickly. So first, the key part of the legal and policy innovation is this giving of in situ land rights to slum dwellers. So the rights over land can only be given in certain kinds of holdings. So they can't be given over, for example, railway lands, also, and a few other kind of state-held lands. So in those instances, households will be offered resettlement in another area. To address this issue of urban poverty, an area of 30 square meters is allocated to the urban poor for free. Any area beyond that needs to be paid for at a benchmark value set by the government. In urban towns, the minimum land that can be so land's being redistributed, and there's kind of spatial tolerances over what is charged, what's free, and what needs to be paid. But importantly, this policy of the land is also associated with a policy to support housing, to build permanent shelter. And so in order to do that, the minimum or maximum internal area of the house needs to be between 21 to 30 square meters of carpet area for households to be eligible for these subsidies. The delivery of the project is a decentralized model, and it actually is led by a part of the state government that isn't traditionally involved in land administration. So land administration is typically conducted by revenue departments. So in this instance, the Housing and Urban Development Department led the work. They're supported by Tata Trust as a partner and other philanthropic organizations. They've brought in tech companies and also an army of local NGOs to try to ensure that the project is really responsive to local conditions and inclusive to the needs of slum dwellers. So the policy aims to better the lives of about 200,000 households. And to date, I think there's been about 50 to 70,000 certificates awarded already. So a key technology, the technology isn't actually super complex. It's simply the establishment of infrastructure throughout the state to use drones for high accuracy mapping. The mapping itself actually takes about 15 minutes per slum. There's different quality assurance checks, and the maps are accompanied by a household survey to identify eligible households, unique households, because there's often multi-generational families under one roof, and to get the households themselves involved in kind of this check and validation process. So the technology has actually been quite a focal point of this project. And here you have a quote by one of the technology companies, where it really was positioned as this, the imagery was positioned as a real engagement bridge of engagement with the communities to help develop trust from slum dwellers. And so this was kind of the starting point for us. is not the case. So did it develop, help to develop trust? So here's the study area. We selected a couple of about 8 communities on the basis of their progress in formalization, which is the award of the land rights certificates. It's a combination of social and demographic variables, as well as physical environmental variables. Typically, the households that we kind of engaged with were about 4 to 8 persons per family. Most fell in the economically weaker section, which is the really the poorest of the poor. Most of them were from lower caste families as well. So just to bring a little bit on the journey with me, just to give you a bit of context of the communities we visited. So you can see, lots of temporary materials and poor quality materials used, kind of poor water and sanitation facilities. In S3 and 4, S3 is actually located near a mine up in the hills, and S4 was located along a railway line. So probably not going to be resettled, some households will be resettled in that community. S6 is probably one of our better kind of seemed more economically less impoverished than in the other slums. And S8 was probably our most impoverished slum, located next to a landfill, and lots of really poor quality and really impermanent housing. So some upgrading outcomes that we were able to see, communal toilets, as you can see on the left, new water pipes, electricity, but also at an individual household level, lots of families starting to undertake construction with more permanent materials. So, okay, so findings, what did we find? So, in terms of procedural confidence, trust in the procedure, well, lots of interesting issues here. So there was quite a lot of awareness about the drone survey, but in some communities, none at all. You can see here that when we surveyed the households that we, in the communities, most of them said they were aware of they participated in the drone survey, and by that I think they meant they observed it happening, and the household survey. But actually, there were a lot of issues around the mapping methodologies. So the imagery, the high resolution imagery, is actually computer processed to use the roof outlines as a proxy for land area. So houses under roofs, houses who didn't have a roof at the time, all got missed. So lots of different issues. All households were supposed to be able to view the map during the household survey, but they didn't. Multiple family households at times were not kind of split up, so eligibility issues came up. There was a bit of concern about the amount of personal data captured, and also there didn't really seem to be a consistent approach to resolving disputes and complaints, which is pretty important if you're thinking about property area and property rights. So a quote up there, you can see some pretty serious things happening on the ground. So one thing the drone camera did was, through the mapping process, one of our communities said they actually changed our administrative information. We went from number 8 ward to number 9 ward, and it means all their social benefits associated that had it documented as number 8. Now they had to go about kind of changing all of that. So ration cards, voter IDs, so on and so forth. So we asked, well, did you raise it? Did you complain? They said, yeah, they did, but we did. But once it's recorded, they said it can't be changed. We followed up on that since then, and yeah, they did actually have to go on to change a lot of their details. I also wanted to put up there, so not all of our households were willing to tell us how much area they had been awarded, or were able to tell us anyway. But you can see on screen with that 30 square meter threshold for the urban poor, quite a number of households came up with an outrageously low land area, 3.83 square meters. It's crazy talk, right? And there's one of the reasons for this is that when there were multiple households under one roof, what they did was they just divided the area by the number of families under that, and you ended up with something like that. But it seemed a weird one because it's a simple technical validation check. But you can see there on the left, a land rights certificate is issued for 28 square feet. And obviously, if this is the external boundary of the house, it creates eligibility issues for the housing subsidy as well. Another key piece of the Odisha project is the creation of slum dwellers associations in each community that's supposed to act as a local governing mechanism and a bridge between communities and project implementers. But actually we found that, so all families are eligible to be part of the local SDA. And in fact, every family needs to provide a representative. But as you can see from the household survey we conducted, most were not part of the SDA. They didn't really know what the SDA was about. One of our communities had a very good SDA, but that was through a lot of support from the municipal government. And in many instances, we found that the local NGO who was supporting the formation of the SDA had actually had to kind of take over because the local community really didn't know how to do it. So in terms of the policy objective of securing land tenure, we did find that communities said, yeah, we feel that there is increased tenure security, we're less likely to get evicted. The women were happy, they now had joint titles and had some kind of assurance about tenure. And there were far less intra-slum disputes, so disputes within the community. But it kind of came at an expense. Most people found that their land area had contracted. And most families were not able to pay the premiums for extra land, so they just had to accept what they were given. For those who like on railway, on areas like railway lines, they had to pay outstanding encroachment taxes for however many years. And that's a significant amount of money before they are able to receive a land rights certificate. And finally, I think these land rights certificates do not seem to hold the same degree of formality as a normal land title in India. They're certainly not in the same register, and they lack a government of Odisha seal, which the people feel is what gives it authority. So some issues there still. And you can see up on the graph here, the area allocated under LRC compared to the area they currently occupy. The families, of course, who were unhappy were the ones who reported that they had a lot less. But you can see it really affects the contraction is quite significant in some areas. The quote on the screen shows, I guess, about a 4 to 5 times contraction. And they've already built this, spent all their life putting all their money building a house that now they don't get to keep, but they do get 30 square meters of land. So some tricky issues washing out in the research. The policy objective of securing livable habitats, well, there's certainly kind of good feedback about improvements at the community level, and certainly for some households, water and toilets within the house itself. But by and large, especially for communities that are located in hazard-prone areas, the housing subsidy is not enough to build a house that can withstand hazards, that can withstand kind of climatic events. And most people found that the subsidy wasn't enough to finish construction. And so we're left with lots of half-built houses in the communities. So, and then finally, that policy aim of kind of securing other social and economic benefits. We found really that most, because of the contraction of housing of land area, they were not eligible for housing subsidies. For those that were eligible, they found that it wasn't enough. And the promise of being able to mortgage the property, to access loans, to lift yourself out of poverty, that was also not happening because the banks were not accepting land rights certificates at all. And it really also, the community said, well, the LRC, we can't use it to do anything because it doesn't record our caste. And when it doesn't have that information, all other avenues to social services. It doesn't happen. So I guess what some of the key things, I mean, we tried to talk about this in a broad sense because, but really some of the key areas that might need to have a little bit more work on, I guess, is the methodology. It just didn't seem relevant to it's quite a Western-driven methodology of computer machine learned methods. But the method of using roof lines as proxies, we're talking about people who live in slums who can't really afford to cobble together enough materials to build a house. So a lot of the living is actually done outside, notwithstanding the extreme heat, right, at the moment. So, and what we found was all those external living spaces that tend to be for bathing, for cooking, they're all gendered spaces. And so really what that meant is that the contraction in property was not only an economic and social issue, it was really also it had gendered implications. So that's kind of one of the things we found, but also with the decentralized model of enrolling so many different stakeholders, there was a huge variance in how the implementation occurred. And there didn't seem to be a really robust oversight mechanism with clear accountability mechanisms. And we have some feedback from communities that talk about the worry about personal data. So lots of these issues don't seem to be thought through yet. And finally, I think that those breaks, those kind of theoretical policy coherence between the land rights certificates and other social and economic benefits like bank loans or housing subsidies, they don't seem to line up really well. And we're seeing lots of kind of consequences within the communities that mean actually there's a new kind of poverty being institutionalized in the communities. They were okay with their houses, but now they don't even have the houses that they've spent a long time trying to build. So I know most families ended up with half-built houses and having to kind of work that out as well. And so, we found in stories of people mortgaging their jewelry, taking out loans from high interest kind of micro lenders or to try to finish the houses. And it just seems to fly in the face of what the project was supposed to do in the first place. So I just finally like to close by acknowledging that the research is a really collaborative piece of work with the NRMC Center for Land Governance in Odisha, India. And a lot of the research wouldn't have been possible without the staff and student interns over the last couple of years. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Serene. Are there any questions? I might start off with a question. So it's pretty clear that the methodology used with the drones wasn't really a relevant method for the mapping. What, in your opinion, would be a relevant method?
I think it has its benefits. So a traditional approach to mapping these settlements would take years. It would just take too long. So I think it's for me, there seemed to be an attribution of overimportance to the technology and not enough emphasis on how you ensure that the imagery outcomes are used in a just way. So I have nothing actually against the drone method, but we know from the way it captures imagery, that it seems very clear that some things will be missed. If you're shooting a camera from the top, there's a big tree, any house underneath won't be captured. But there are some really clear problem areas. It just seemed that there was such a push to do this really quickly. that in that attempt, all these things just got missed. And yeah, I think it kind of is worth pursuing, but it just needs a rethink about what the limitations of the approach is and how you kind of recover that. I think, we forget that this project is sold as a 10-year security project. We're going to give you land rights, but in effect, it's a land redistribution process, which means there's winners and losers. And so how do you take technology forward with that in the back of your mind? Is technology going to create more winners or more losers? Like, I think there's some kind of usability issues that didn't seem to have been thought through.
Thanks, Serene. Are there any other questions?
I think it was really interesting to hear from a different state's perspective, a really similar kind of thing to what I was looking at. But I was really interested in what you were saying about the kind of shared spaces being highly gendered and a really important part of people's lives, because that was the same finding that I had. And something that I'm working on a journal article at the moment, looking at how slum redevelopments have been really similar over time, like putting people into really kind of foreign environments and completely forgetting about that medium scale. And I was wondering if you had anything to do with those resettlement projects in Odisha and what was kind of happening there, whether there was any kind of allowance for that common space.
Not in the resettlement itself. So I think similar to you, if I remember correctly, there's a lot of resourcing around child care centers or shared community spaces. But I feel like that's a really templated approach, and for me, it seems it universalizes this problem. But actually, instead of kind of going into spaces that into settlements and say, okay, well, you're the experts, you've lived here for generations in many instances, what do you think needs to happen? I mean, I think, of course, they're the classic infrastructure issues, the services, the basic amenities. But, even when we saw the toilets kind of come in 6 months, they're unusable because it doesn't gel with how people live their lives. It doesn't fit the rhythm of their lives. And then if you take away space from someone, if you say, okay, you're used to living in 280 square meters, now you only have 30, there's going to be some kind of contest that you've introduced around that as well. So I think we're at this stage in this research, we've kind of just been it's just been such a revelation as to how many little mistakes have amounted to significant consequences, I think. And for me, I guess recently we've got a paper under review about the participatory aspects of this, which I think is where what you're interested in, Kylie, these issues should wash out, right? If there's true participation. But I think we found, like with many other development projects, participation is quite passive, and there's an expectation that tomorrow the Slum Dweller Association will be fully functional and can run and can collect minutes and hold it in the registry, and to not think through that. Okay, you've positioned a community entity in a position of power. Do you not think that would be now subject to politics as well? So yeah, I mean, I think, so the short answer, Kylie, is no, not yet, because we've kind of been, kind of stunned by the amount of things we've we've got to wade through. But I mean, I think in many instances of slum resettlement, it never works.
Yeah.
You've moved them away from livelihoods, you've moved them away from families. Even in high-risk areas, they will come back. So yeah, I don't, I mean, enforcement, I guess, is part of it, regulation is part of it, but I think you're on the money. It's how is space used, and how has that community kind of, they're using the space, quite well now. It might not tick yours or my box of law, but it works for them. How do we support that rather than trying to upend the model? But yeah.
And it seems like people approach, or outsiders approach, with so many wrong assumptions. Like, one, that it's all bad, when, as we know, it's not. That, like, as you said, people are using space quite well. Two, that people have the skills or even the time to organize themselves. I mean, if you're fighting for survival and you know you're earning money that day to feed your family, you don't have time to write meeting minutes about some meeting of some obscure thing that's happening later. And there was a third one I was going to say too. That there's just this massive poverty issue. Like, even if you legalize land tenure, then people have to pay tax and they can't afford it. There's a reason why people are living in this situation in the first place. And it's not because of they don't know how to live in a house or something. So it feels like there's a lot of assumptions that are just kind of wrong in the first place.
Look, I agree. I mean, I think the theory of change that we normalize is it's oversimplistic. And I guess my worry is that the data creates a black box, an even bigger black box over those assumptions. And in an industry that's kind of really focused on spatial data, administrative data, I think that's potentially quite problematic, but I don't. All we can do is squirrel away at the challenges. And
that's it.
Hopefully,
what's the future of the? I'm sorry, I'm just asking all these questions. Is that okay? I was just going to ask, what's the future of the project?
Yeah, so I think that the future of the project is. So there's a few different angles. One is kind of to keep investigating, but I don't know. I feel like we might be not that well received because we've been a bit critical, in a constructive way. But I think for us, it's to try to get into kind of pushing the research up into a policy kind of brief, just trying to lay out some of the connections, so to really string out kind of the logic of what we're seeing. But I think there's another element there. There's a whole other element there around kind of the digital agenda in India, which is really prominent. There's a kind of another space here about how this is kind of a model that's being used in many formalization projects around the world. So there are kind of some big themes that we'll continue to work in. But I think for us, immediate focus of our work in this space is to try to get into the year of government or type to trust, which we have been a little bit, but COVID's not really helped with that kind of engagement.
Did residents have much access to technology? Like, was it just kind of basic phones?
So I think the technology side, I think, is a whole other, you can do another piece of work there.
I'm sorry, I should stop asking questions. Mute myself.
No, don't stop it. So, Serene, I was just wondering how COVID impacted your field trips.
Yeah, a lot. So I think the beauty of COVID is it takes the non-local researcher out of the picture. So I think for me, it's been a really, been a real joy having an excuse to localize the research, which it should be, right? We should plan ourselves out of these projects. Having said that, though, there are kind of pros and cons about it, because we conduct research in a certain way. We have certain expectations, we have certain kind of principles and governance protocols. They don't necessarily work, I think, in the field with kind of students who are trying to support. So I was on WhatsApp like 24/7 with them while they were doing the work, which was really exciting as well, you know, having a different kind of role in the research. But I do think COVID's really pointed out how we should rethink how we should think about how we do this kind of work. I'm useless there, really. I can't speak the language, I might be able to drive the car, change a tire, all those sorts of things. But basically, I think the couple of communities that I did manage to go to, my job was really to look at body language, kind of ask tricky questions, but it also emphasizes the importance of having a really good partner, which I did. Our local partner was excellent. So the short question is, I did the research via WhatsApp, via a whole team of students from 2020 onwards, which I wouldn't trade. It's been really good. I think everyone should do it. Everyone should turn the research over to local people and sit back and read it.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, there's a comment now in the chat.
Okay.
Emil, in the winners and losers. Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I just expand on that a bit, Emil? So I was actually also wondering too. So they were promised, rights, certain rights, and even the ability to mortgage their allotment. And you said there were winners and losers. So what did the winners actually gain if what they were promised wasn't delivered?
So I think fundamentally people forget that formalization itself, giving someone land rights, is to the exclusion of everybody else. So the very act of giving land right to one person makes everybody else in a communal setting a loser. In essence, you're excluded. Land formalization is an act of exclusion. It's not an act of inclusion. So I think that fact gets overlooked quite a bit, So the democratic perspective is then, how do you reduce the burden on the people who didn't benefit as much? So the winners, I guess everybody has a perception of what they benefited and what they lost out on. I think what we saw quite clearly was that most people lost out in terms of land that they currently were able to use and occupy, and now the expectation that they were, they could only use and occupy a smaller amount of that land. So if we're talking about land, that's at an individual level, I think that's what a lot of families lost. But the trade-off is that the land is returned to the community through social infrastructure like playgrounds, community spaces, so on and so forth. So that's kind of one way of looking at it. I think a lot of the stories of frustration, there were certainly stories of, yes, we're really happy about this, we feel a lot safer. So it's not to diminish that at all. And most part, people did say, yeah, we never thought we would have a title document of some description, so it's really great. But I think it's when you start to work through what the benefits are supposed to be. So if your perspective is oriented to what the policy benefits are, then you can start to work through what people are not getting, And so by not getting bank loans, and Jamuna, I think you've raised the I think on kind of banks as well. So by not being able to access those bank loans as they thought they could, they had to turn to informal credit, and that has its own burden. By not being able to finish building houses, it conveys another kind of burden on the household. So I guess, Emil, does that answer the question a little bit for you?
Yes, thank you so much for expanding. Yeah, I was just looking at something very similar for a paper, but yeah, I like the way that you expanded on that, because I think what I was looking at was a lot more big. It was like, like the example was an airport. It's positioning it further away from the city, where an airport might typically go was going to impact on the people who could least afford to live close to the city, but to the benefit of people that could afford to travel. Yeah.
So I think, there's a lot of curly policy questions in this about people's lives, I think. So Damuna, legal and policy barriers disturbed by the recognition. I don't think Damuna, do you want to just expand on that a little bit? Is this, hey, is this Damuna from LEI?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I was just wondering what kind of issues, for instance, in the policies or in the laws that definitely got to disturb the recognition of the land rights that people were given, or the whole entire process of resettlement, but also linking it to the accessibility of bank loans and also other social services that you talked about. I was just wondering, in terms of the project, were there any policy or legal barriers that got to disturb the full successful or realization of the?
Okay, I think I understand that. So to give you a bit of background, the law that was passed was about 9 pages, and it passed in a phenomenally short amount of time, which is unheard of. So this is a piece of legislation that was written and passed and advocated not by the traditional land administration authority, but by a housing and urban development authority. Anyway, it got passed, but I think and I guess this is my read of it. Leadership from a different government department was great. In this instance, it kind of kickstarted a lot of things, but it also missed out a whole other policy background on land administration, which is the kind of organizational expertise that the traditional revenue department would have brought. I mean, I think, so the law actually doesn't say, for example, that the law is silent on where these land rights certificates should be recorded. So it's not in the normal land registry, and it's somewhere out there. So, but because by virtue of it not having a Government of Odisha seal, even something like the unit of analysis written on the certificate is different from all other kinds of unit of measurement. So in India, it's hectares, decimals, square meters maybe, but in this instance, it's square feet, and it's kind of driven everyone slightly bananas as well. I mean, so there's kind of some interesting issues that it may not be the remit of policy, I think, but it certainly shows that in its simplicity, the legislation really needs a little bit more it probably needs another round of rules to support its implementation. I think it's a little bit thin on detail, and so it's open for interpretation. And I think that's kind of what might have happened. So, you know, the banks were waiting for some kind of decree to say should be considered equal to a normal land title, but they didn't get that. And so as far as they were concerned, being risk-averse companies, they weren't going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. So I guess it's kind of like someone forgot to sit down and just map it out a little bit, which seems, it can't be, right? It's just kind of touches too many policy points. But I think inherently that shows you how complex land is as well in India. You know, it's not just economics, it's caste, it's culture, it's a lot of other things. And you know, it's connected to secondary public institutions, tertiary public institutions, and all those public institutions need to be well functioning for all of this to come together, and it just isn't the case.
Thanks, Serene. Are there any more questions? Okay. Well, on behalf of everyone, Serene, I'd like to thank you for a really engaging presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks for letting me come on.
And I'll see you all next time.
Thanks heaps. Thanks, guys. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.